I opened my online banking app on a Tuesday morning, expecting to see the $87,000 I'd been saving for 15 years, and instead, I saw $1,200. My hands started shaking so badly, I almost dropped my phone. I refreshed the page 3 times, thinking it had to be a mistake, thinking maybe the bank system was down, thinking there was no possible way that money could just be gone. But it wasn't a mistake. The account I'd opened when my son Marcus was born, the account I'd put every spare dollar into for his future, for college, or whatever dreams he wanted to chase, that account had been emptied. And the only other person who had access to it was Marcus himself, my 25-year-old son, who I'd raised alone since his father walked out when he was 2 years old. The son I'd worked double shifts for, the son I'd sacrificed everything for, had taken nearly $86,000 without even asking me, without even telling me, and I had no idea where it went or why. I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story from. I want to know how far it's traveled. Because what started as the biggest financial betrayal of my life turned into a carefully planned revenge that taught my son and his wife a lesson they'll never forget. And I need you to hear every detail of how a 54-year-old Black woman who works as a hospital administrator took back her power and made sure nobody would ever take advantage of her again. My name is Diane. I'm 54 years old, and I've worked at Mercy Hospital for 28 years. I started as a receptionist when I was 26, fresh out of community college with a baby on my hip, and worked my way up to director of operations. It wasn't easy. There were years when I worked 2 jobs, when I took every overtime shift available, when I ate ramen for dinner so Marcus could have chicken and vegetables, when I wore the same 3 work outfits for years because his school clothes and supplies came first. Everything I did, every decision I made, every sacrifice was for him, so he could have opportunities I never had, so he wouldn't struggle the way I struggled. And I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being a good mother, teaching him the value of hard work and planning for the future. But looking back now, I wonder if maybe I taught him the wrong lesson. Maybe by always sacrificing, by always putting him first, by never saying no, I taught him that my needs didn't matter, that he was entitled to everything I had, that there were no limits to what he could take from me. When Marcus turned 10, I opened a savings account specifically for his future. I remember that day so clearly. We went to the bank together on a Saturday morning, and I explained to him that this account was special, that every paycheck I was going to put money into it, that by the time he was grown, it would be enough to help him start his life the right way. I told him about compound interest, about how money grows over time, about how planning for the future is one of the most important things you can do. And he was so excited. His eyes lit up, and he asked me how much money would be in there when he turned 18. And I said, if we're disciplined, if we save consistently, probably around $60,000. And he hugged me so tight and said, "You're the best mom in the world." And I believed that I was. I believed I was setting him up for success, teaching him financial responsibility, showing him what it means to work hard and plan ahead. I showed him the statements every year on his birthday. It became a tradition. We'd sit at the kitchen table, and I'd pull up the account online, and we'd look at the balance together and watch it grow. $5,000, then $12,000, then $20,000, then $35,000. And Marcus would get so excited. He'd thank me and tell me how lucky he was to have a mom who cared about his future. And I'd feel so proud, so validated in all the sacrifices I was making, the extra shifts, the skipped meals, the bargain shopping, the saying no to things I wanted so I could say yes to his future. And I thought we were building something together. I thought we were a team. I thought he understood that this money represented more than just dollars. It represented my time, my energy, my love, my belief in him and his potential. But I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. Marcus was a good kid growing up. He wasn't perfect, no kid is, but he was kind and respectful. He did reasonably well in school. He had friends, he played basketball, he volunteered at church. He was the kind of son that made you proud, the kind that other mothers complimented you on, saying, "You must have done something right, Diane. Marcus is such a good boy." And I'd smile and thank them, and inside I'd feel this warm glow of accomplishment, like all those sacrifices had been worth it, because I'd raised a good human being, someone who would go out into the world and make it better, someone who understood values and integrity and the importance of family. But kids change, people change, and sometimes the person they become isn't the person you thought you were raising. When Marcus went to college at State University about 2 hours away from home, I missed him terribly. But I was so proud. He'd gotten some scholarships and financial aid, and I helped cover what those didn't, with the understanding that the savings account would remain untouched, would continue to grow, would be there for him after graduation, when he really needed it, when he was ready to start his career, buy a house, build a life. And Marcus agreed. He said, "Mom, I know how hard you've worked for that money. I would never touch it without talking to you first. It's our safety net, it's my future, and I'm going to make you proud." And I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my son, my baby, the person I trusted most in the world. And up until that point, he'd never given me a reason not to trust him. He'd never lied to me, never stolen from me, never betrayed me. So when I added him to the account as a joint holder when he turned 18, it seemed like the logical thing to do. I remember sitting at the bank with Marcus on his 18th birthday, adding his name to the account. The banker explained that as a joint account holder, Marcus would have full access to the funds, could make withdrawals or transfers without my permission or knowledge. And I remember Marcus looking at me and saying, "Mom, I would never do anything with this account without talking to you first. This is our money. This is what you've worked for. And I trust you to make the right decisions with it." And I said, "I know, baby. I trust you too." And we signed the papers, and the banker smiled at us and said, "It's so nice to see a mother and son with such a good relationship. You can tell you've raised him right." And I glowed with pride because, yes, I had raised him right. I'd taught him right, values and integrity and respect, and he would never betray that trust, never take advantage of me, never see me as anything other than his mother who loved him and wanted the best for him. The first 2 years of college, Marcus came home regularly. Every few weeks, he'd drive home for the weekend and we'd have dinner and catch up, and he'd tell me about his classes and his friends and his plans, and everything seemed normal. Everything seemed fine. He was still my Marcus, still the son I'd raised, still someone I could trust and be proud of. But then in his junior year, everything changed. That's when he met Vanessa. And suddenly, my son became someone I didn't recognize. The first time Marcus brought Vanessa home to meet me, I knew something was off. I opened the door, and there she was, this beautiful girl with long, straight, dark hair and perfect makeup, and designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. And the way she looked at my house, at my modest 3-bedroom ranch with its dated kitchen and worn carpet, I saw something flicker across her face. It was quick, but I caught it. Disappointment, maybe, or judgment, or pity, like she couldn't believe her boyfriend came from such humble beginnings. And I felt this instant dislike, which I tried to suppress because I didn't want to be that mother, the one who's never good enough for her son's girlfriends, the one who's jealous or possessive or impossible to please. But my instinct was screaming at me that this girl was trouble, that she was going to hurt my son. that she didn't value the things we valued. And I should have listened to that instinct. I should have trusted it. But I didn't, because I didn't want to be that mother. Vanessa was sweet to my face, overly sweet, in that way that feels fake. She complimented my house, calling it cozy, which I knew was code for small. She complimented my cooking, though I noticed she barely ate anything. She asked me questions about my job and my life, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. She was just going through the motions, being polite, because that's what you do when you meet your boyfriend's mother. But there was no warmth behind it, no genuine interest, no real desire to know me or connect with me. I was just an obligation, someone she had to win over to keep Marcus happy. And I could see that. Marcus couldn't see it, or didn't want to see it. He was completely smitten, watching her with these adoring eyes, hanging on her every word, laughing at everything she said, like she was the most fascinating person he'd ever met. And I felt this pang of loss, because I could see that I was losing him, that this girl was pulling him away from me and into her world where I didn't belong. After that first visit, Marcus started changing, slowly at first, then more dramatically. He started caring about things he'd never cared about before: designer brands, expensive restaurants, what kind of car he drove, what kind of apartment he lived in. He started making comments about how his coworkers all had nicer things, how Vanessa's friends all lived in luxury apartments in the city, how he wanted to be able to provide a certain lifestyle for his future wife. And every time he said these things, I'd remind him that building wealth takes time, that he needed to be patient, that the money in his account was for building a solid foundation, not for keeping up with people who probably had trust funds or rich parents or mountains of debt. But Marcus would just nod and change the subject. And I could tell he wasn't really hearing me. He was too caught up in Vanessa's world, too focused on impressing her and her family, too concerned with appearing successful rather than actually being successful. I met Vanessa's parents about 6 months after Marcus and Vanessa started dating. They invited us to dinner at their house, and I should have said no. I should have made an excuse. But Marcus begged me to come. He said, Mom, it's important to Vanessa that you meet her family, that you see where she comes from. And I agreed, because I wanted to support my son, even though every instinct I had was telling me this dinner would be a disaster. And I was right. Their house was in an exclusive suburb, in a neighborhood where the houses started at $500,000 and went up from there. It was massive, easily 5 times the size of my house, with a circular driveway and a fountain and a 3-car garage. And I pulled up in my 10-year-old Honda Civic, and I felt so small, so inadequate, so out of place. And I hated that. I hated that these people and their house made me feel less than, made me feel like I hadn't accomplished enough, like I wasn't good enough. Vanessa's mother, Patricia, answered the door, and she looked me up and down in a way that was subtle but unmistakable, taking in my department store dress, my sensible shoes, my off-brand purse, and I saw that same flicker of judgment I'd seen in Vanessa's eyes. You must be Diane, she said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Come in, please. And she led me through this enormous foyer with marble floors and a chandelier into a formal living room where Vanessa's father, Donald, was waiting. He was a big man, tall and broad, with the kind of confidence that comes from always having money, from never struggling, from never having to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. And when he shook my hand, his grip was firm, but his eyes were cold, appraising, deciding in that moment that I wasn't someone who mattered, that I wasn't someone he needed to impress or charm or even be particularly nice to. Dinner was excruciating. They asked me questions about my job, and when I told them I was the director of operations at a hospital, Patricia said. Oh, how nice. And then immediately changed the subject, like healthcare administration wasn't worth discussing. Like my 28 years of hard work and climbing the ladder meant nothing compared to Donald's business, which apparently involved real estate development, though I noticed he was vague about the details. They talked about their country club, about their recent trip to Europe, about the new Mercedes they were considering buying. And the whole time I could feel them looking down on me, silently judging me for not being wealthy enough, sophisticated enough, good enough for their daughter. And I sat there eating their expensive food in their expensive house, and I thought to myself, these people are not good people. These people value all the wrong things, and they're going to destroy my son. But Marcus couldn't see it. He was too busy being impressed by their lifestyle, too busy wanting what they had, too busy trying to prove he was worthy of being part of their world. After that dinner, things accelerated. Marcus and Vanessa got engaged after dating for only 6 months, which I thought was insane. They barely knew each other. They were both so young. Marcus was only 24, and Vanessa was 23. But when I tried to talk to Marcus about it, tried to suggest they wait a bit longer, get to know each other better, make sure they were compatible, he got defensive. He said, "Mom, you don't understand what Vanessa and I have. It's real, it's special, and I don't want to wait. I want to marry her. I want to build a life with her." And I said, "Okay, Marcus, if you're sure, but I hope you're making this decision for the right reasons. Not because you're trying to prove something to Vanessa's family, not because you're caught up in the lifestyle they represent, but because you genuinely love her and want to spend your life with her." And he said, "Of course, Mom, I love her. She's everything to me." And what could I say? He was an adult, making his own choices. All I could do was support him and hope he knew what he was doing. They got married 6 months later, in a ceremony that Vanessa's parents paid for. And I offered to contribute. I wanted to be part of my son's wedding, wanted to feel like I had some say, some involvement, some acknowledgement that I was important too. But Patricia waved me off with that condescending smile I'd come to hate. "Oh, don't worry about it, Diane," she said. "We've got this covered. You just enjoy the day." Like I was a guest at my own son's wedding, like my contribution wouldn't have been enough anyway. Like whatever I could afford wouldn't measure up to their standards. And I sat there at that wedding, watching my son marry this woman, and I felt so alone, so excluded, so diminished. Like I'd spent 24 years raising Marcus, and now I was being pushed aside, replaced by these people who valued money over love, appearances over substance, status over character. And I cried during the ceremony, but not happy tears, grief tears, because I felt like I was losing my son, like he was disappearing into this family that didn't respect me, didn't value me, didn't think I was good enough. And there was nothing I could do to stop it. After the wedding, Marcus and Vanessa moved into a luxury apartment that cost more per month than my mortgage. They bought expensive furniture and designer clothes and went out to fancy restaurants multiple times a week. And I watched their social media and saw them living this life that seemed so glamorous, so perfect. And I wondered where the money was coming from. Marcus had a decent job as a junior engineer, but it didn't pay enough for the lifestyle they were living. And I asked him about it, casually, tried not to sound like I was prying. And he said, "Oh, Vanessa's parents help us out some, and we're just enjoying life, Mom. We work hard. We deserve nice things." And I said, "As long as you're being responsible, Marcus, as long as you're not going into debt trying to keep up appearances." And he said, "Don't worry, Mom. We're fine. We've got it under control." But I didn't believe him. I could see the signs of someone living beyond their means, someone trying to project an image that didn't match their reality, someone heading for a financial disaster. But what could I do? He was a grown man, making his own choices. The first hint that something was seriously wrong came about 4 months after the wedding. I was checking my savings account balance online, something I did religiously once a week, and I noticed the balance was lower than it should have been. Not dramatically lower, but about $5,000 less than my calculations showed it should be. And I thought, maybe I'd made a mistake in my spreadsheet. Maybe I'd forgotten to record a transfer or miscalculated the interest. But I went through everything carefully, and no, the balance was definitely wrong, which meant someone had withdrawn money. And since I hadn't done it, that someone had to be Marcus. I called the bank and asked for a detailed transaction history. They sent it over, and there it was, a $5,000 transfer made at 2 in the morning 3 weeks earlier, transferred to an account I didn't recognize. And my heart started pounding because Marcus had taken money from our account without telling me, without asking, without any discussion. I called him immediately, tried to keep my voice calm, tried not to jump to conclusions. And when he answered, I said, "Marcus, I need to ask you something. Did you take $5,000 out of your savings account?" And there was this long pause, this guilty silence. And then he said, "Mom, I was going to tell you. We had an emergency. Vanessa's car needed repairs, and we didn't have the cash. And I was going to pay it back, I swear. I just needed to borrow it temporarily." And I said, "Marcus, that money isn't for emergencies like car repairs. That money is for your future, for a house or starting a business or something significant. And you didn't even ask me, you just took it." And he got defensive. He said, "It's my account too, Mom. My name is on it. I have every right to access that money." And technically, he was right. Legally, he could take whatever he wanted because I'd made him a joint account holder. But morally, ethically, it was wrong. It was a violation of trust. It was taking advantage of everything I'd worked for. We argued about it for 20 minutes, going in circles with him, justifying what he'd done, and me trying to make him understand why it was wrong, why it hurt me, why it made me question whether I could trust him. And finally, he said, "Fine, Mom. I'm sorry. I should have asked. I'll pay it back, I promise." And I said, "Yes, you will, Marcus. You'll pay back every penny. And then we're going to have a serious conversation about boundaries because what you did was not okay." And he agreed, and I thought that was the end of it. I thought it was a one-time mistake, a lapse in judgment that wouldn't happen again. But I was wrong, so wrong, because that $5,000 was just the beginning. It was Marcus testing the waters, seeing if he could get away with it, seeing if I'd notice or care or stop him. And when I didn't do anything beyond complaining, when I didn't remove him from the account or set up alerts or take any real action to protect my money, he learned that he could get away with it, that I'd complain but ultimately do nothing. And that was my mistake. That where I should have acted, should have protected myself, should have seen what was coming. But I didn't because he was my son and I trusted him. And I thought won. Mistake didn't define him. Over the next few months, I noticed a few more small withdrawals. Nothing as large as that first $5,000, but $1,000 here, $2,000 there, and each time I'd call Marcus and he'd have some excuse. Vanessa needed a medical procedure. They had unexpected bills. Her parents needed help with something, and he'd promise to pay it back. He'd say, "Mom, I'm sorry. It won't happen again. I just need to get through this rough patch." And I believe him because I wanted to believe him. Because the alternative that my son was systematically stealing from me was too painful to accept. So I convinced myself that he was just going through a hard time, that young couples struggle financially, that he'd mature and things would get better. But they didn't get better. They got worse. much worse. I should have seen it coming, should have recognized the pattern, should have protected myself, but I didn't. And that Tuesday morning, when I opened my banking app and saw $1,200 where there should have been $87,000, I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing. Because this wasn't a few $1,000s, this was everything. This was 15 years of my life. 15 years of sacrifice and hard work and planning, and my son had taken it all. He'd emptied the account. He'd stolen my entire future, and I didn't even know why. I sat there at my kitchen table, staring at my phone screen, feeling this mix of shock and rage and grief so overwhelming, I thought I might be sick. And all I could think was, how? How did I raise someone who could do this to me? How did the sweet boy who hugged me tight and told me I was the best mom in the world turn into someone who would steal everything I had? I called the bank immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. And I spoke to a customer service representative named Jennifer, and I said, "There's been a mistake. Someone has stolen money from my account. I need you to investigate this fraud right away." And Jennifer pulled up my account and reviewed the transaction history, and after a few minutes, she said, "Ma'am, I see several large transfers over the past few months, all initiated online using the correct login credentials with two-factor authentication. There's no indication of fraud here. These transfers were authorized by someone with legitimate access to the account." And I said, "But I didn't authorize them. I didn't make these transfers." And she said, "Ma'am, you're not the only." Account holder. This account has two authorized users, and all these transfers were initiated by the secondary account holder. Would you like me to read you the dates and amounts? And my blood went cold because I knew what she was going to say. I knew it was Marcus. I knew he'd betrayed me. But hearing it confirmed, hearing the details, made it real, made it undeniable. But I said, "Yes, read them to me. I need to know everything." And Jennifer went through the transaction history. $5,000 transferred on January 15th at 2:47 a.m. $8,000 transferred on February 3rd at 1:23 a.m. $15,000 transferred on March 10th at 3:15 a.m. $20,000 transferred on April 7th at 2:56 a.m. And then the big one, $38,000 transferred on May 2nd at 4:02 a.m. Every single transfer made in the middle of the night, when he knew I'd be asleep, when he knew I'd be asleep, when he knew I wouldn't get a notification, when he knew he could drain my account without me knowing until it was too late. And each transfer went to the same external account, an account I didn't recognize, an account that wasn't his personal checking, which meant the money had gone somewhere else, to someone else, for some purpose I didn't understand. I asked Jennifer if there was any way to reverse the transfers, any way to get my money back, and she said in a voice full of sympathy, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but since these transfers were made by an authorized account holder, there's nothing we can do. This isn't fraud. It's a dispute between joint account holders. You'll need to resolve it directly with the other account holder, or through legal means." And I felt this wave of helplessness wash over me, because she was right. Legally, Marcus had done nothing wrong. I'd given him access to the account. I'd made him a joint holder. I'd trusted him, and he'd taken advantage of that trust. And there was nothing the bank could do, nothing law enforcement could do. It was a civil matter, a family matter, something I'd have to handle myself. And I had no idea how to do that. How do you handle your own child stealing from you? How do you process that level of betrayal? I hung up with the bank and sat there in my kitchen, in the house where I'd raised Marcus, where we'd had thousands of meals and conversations, where I'd held him when he cried and cheered for him when he succeeded. And I felt this profound sense of loss, not just of the money, though that was devastating, but of my son, of the person I thought he was, of the relationship I thought we had. Because the Marcus I'd raised, the Marcus I knew, would never do this. Would never steal from his mother, would never lie and sneak and betray trust like this, which meant I'd never really known him, or he'd changed so much that he was no longer the person I'd raised. And either way, I'd lost him. I'd lost my son, and that hurt more than losing the money. I tried calling Marcus immediately, hit his number and listened to it ring once, twice, 3 times, and then voicemail. I tried again and again, and on the 5th call, he finally picked up, sounding annoyed. "Mom, what is it? I'm at work. I can't talk right now." And I said, "You need to come to my house tonight after work. We need to talk right now, this minute. It's important." And there must have been something in my voice, some edge of fury or grief or desperation, because Marcus hesitated and then said, "Okay, fine, I'll come over around 6. And I said, "Good. And don't even think about not showing up, Marcus. This is serious. This is the most serious conversation we will ever have." And he said, "Okay, Mom, I'll be there." And he hung up. And I sat there for the rest of the day in a state of numb shock, not crying, not moving, just sitting and staring, and trying to understand how my life had come to this. At exactly 6 p.m., Marcus's car pulled into my driveway, and when he got out, I saw that Vanessa was with him, and something about that made me even angrier. He'd brought her to this confrontation? Brought her as what? Backup? Moral support? A witness? He walked up to my door, and I opened it before he could knock, and I saw his face, his guilty, nervous face, and I knew he knew exactly why I'd called him. I said, "Inside now," and they came in and sat on my couch, and I remained standing because I needed the height advantage, needed to feel like I had some power in this situation, even though I felt powerless, completely powerless, because my son had stolen everything from me, and there was nothing I could do about it, legally, nothing that would get my money back. I didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk. I pulled up my bank account on my laptop and turned it around so they could see the screen. And I said, "Marcus, where is my money? Where is the $87,000 that was in our account? Where did it go? And why did you take it without asking me, without telling me?" And I watched his face carefully, watched for surprise or confusion or any indication that he didn't know what I was talking about. But what I saw was guilt, immediate, obvious, crushing guilt. His eyes widened, his face flushed dark red, and he looked at Vanessa like he was asking her what to do, what to say, how to handle this and that. Look, that silent communication between them told me everything I needed to know, told me that this hadn't been Marcus's idea alone, that Vanessa had been involved, that she'd probably orchestrated the whole thing, and my son had been too weak or too blinded by love or too desperate to impress her to say no. Vanessa spoke first, and her voice was calm, sweet even, like she was talking to a child who didn't understand something simple. "Diane, we were going to tell you. We've been meaning to tell you. We just wanted to wait until everything was settled, until we had good news to share." And I said, "Tell me what, Vanessa? What exactly were you going to tell me?" And she glanced at Marcus, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. And then she said, "My family was going through a really difficult time. My dad's business was failing, and they were about to lose everything. Their house, their cars, everything they've worked for. And their family, Diane. They're Marcus's family now, too. And when family is in trouble, you help them. You don't just stand by and watch them suffer. I felt this surge of rage so intense, I had to grip the back of a chair to steady myself. You took my money, I said, my voice shaking. You took money that I saved for 15 years, working double shifts and overtime and sacrificing everything so that Marcus could have a future? And you gave it to your parents so they could keep their country club membership and their Mercedes and their house that's twice the size of this one? And Vanessa had the audacity to look offended and say, "It wasn't like that, Diane. They needed real help. They were facing foreclosure and bankruptcy, and we couldn't just let that happen." And I said, "Why not? Why is it Marcus's responsibility to save your parents from their own poor financial decisions? Why is it my responsibility, since it's my money we're talking about here?" Marcus finally spoke up, his voice quiet, defeated. "Mom, I know you're upset, but Vanessa's right. They needed help. And I thought about your account, about how you always said that money was for my future, for building a life. And this is building our life. This is investing in our family." And I stared at my son, this man I'd raised alone, this person I'd sacrificed everything for. And I said, "Investing, Marcus? You think giving $87,000 to Vanessa's parents is investing in your future? Do you have a contract? Do you have a repayment plan? Did you even discuss terms? Or did you just hand over my life savings and hope for the best?" And Marcus wouldn't look at me, couldn't look at me. And I knew the answer. I knew he'd given away my money with no plan, no protection, no guarantee he'd ever see it again. I said, "Marcus, that account wasn't just yours. Your name was on it, yes, but that money represented 15 years of my labor, my sacrifice. Every dollar in there was money I could have spent on myself, money I could have used to upgrade my house or my car or take a vacation. But I didn't. I saved it for you. I put your future ahead of my own comfort, ahead of my own needs. And you took it. You took all of it and gave it to people who've done nothing for you, people who look down on you, people who see you as less than. And you didn't even ask me. You just took it like a thief in the night, making transfers at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning when you knew I wouldn't notice until it was too late. That's not a mistake, Marcus. That's calculated. That's premeditated. That's theft, even if it's technically legal." Vanessa stood up, her face flushed, her voice sharp. "Diane, you're being completely unreasonable. We're going to pay you back, obviously. My parents aren't going to just keep the money. They've promised they'll pay us back once the business recovers, and then we'll pay you back. It's essentially a loan." And I said, "Oh, really? When exactly did your parents promise to pay you back? Do you have that in writing, or was it just a verbal agreement? And when will this magical business recovery happen? Next month? Next year? Never?" And Vanessa hesitated, looked at Marcus again, and said, "They said once things turn around, once they get back on their feet, they'll pay us back with interest even." And I laughed a bitter, angry laugh and said, "You gave away $87,000 based on a vague promise from people who were facing bankruptcy? People who clearly have no idea how to manage money? People who care more about appearances than reality? And you expect me to believe that money is coming back?" Marcus tried to defend himself, tried to say, "Mom, it's not like we had a choice. They were desperate. They would have lost everything." And I said, "So what, Marcus? So what? If they lost their oversized house and their expensive cars, maybe they should lose those things. Maybe they should face the consequences of living beyond their means. Maybe they should learn that you can't maintain a lifestyle you can't afford and expect other people to bail you out. And more to the point, why is it your responsibility to save them? You've been Married to Vanessa for 6 months? 6 months! And you're already bankrupting yourself to impress her parents, to prove you're worthy of being part of their family, even though that family is built on debt and lies and fake wealth. We argued for over an hour, going in circles, Marcus and Vanessa defending their decision, saying I was being unfair, saying I didn't understand their position, saying family helps family, and me trying to make them see that what they'd done was wrong, was a betrayal, was going to have lasting consequences for all of us. And finally, I said, "Get out, both of you. Get out of my house and don't come back until you can return every penny you stole." And Marcus actually had the nerve to say, "Mom, don't be like this. It's not stolen. It's my money too. I had every legal right to take it." And I said, "You're right, Marcus. Legally, you did nothing wrong. But morally, ethically, you betrayed me. You betrayed every sacrifice I ever made for you. You destroyed my trust. You damaged our relationship, possibly beyond repair. And for what? For Vanessa's parents? For people who will never respect you, who will never see you as an equal, who will probably never pay you back? All that money, all that sacrifice, all those years of my life, gone. And you don't even see what you did wrong. You don't even understand how profoundly you've hurt me." Marcus's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if he was crying because he understood what he'd done or because he didn't like being confronted with it. Vanessa put her arm around him like she was protecting him from me, like I was the villain in this story. And she said, "Come on, Marcus, we don't have to stay here and listen to this. Your mother is being completely irrational. Let's go." And they stood up and headed for the door. And I said, "Marcus, if you walk out that door right now, our relationship is over. I mean it. I can't have someone in my life who would betray me like this, who would steal from me, who would lie to me for months. I deserve better than that, even from my own son, especially from my own son." And he paused in the doorway and turned back to me. And for a moment, I thought he was going to apologize, thought he was going to say he understood, thought we might be able to find some way forward. But then Vanessa tugged his arm and said, "Marcus, let's go. She's not being reasonable. We can talk to her when she's calmed down." And he nodded, and they left. They walked out my door and got in their car and drove away. And I stood there in my living room, alone. The house where I'd raised him, and I felt this crushing weight of loss, not just of money, but of my son, of my relationship with him, of everything I'd built my life around. For the next 3 days, I could barely function. I called in sick to work, which I never do, and I just stayed in my house, in my pajamas, crying and sleeping, and trying to process what had happened, trying to understand how I'd gotten here, how my son, the person I loved most in the world, could betray me so completely. I thought about calling him, thought about trying to fix things. But what was there to fix? He'd stolen from me. He'd chosen Vanessa's family over me. And he'd shown no real remorse, no understanding of what he'd done wrong. He'd defended his actions, had tried to make me seem unreasonable for being upset that my life savings had been emptied. And I realized that the Marcus I'd raised either never existed or was gone. And in his place was this stranger who valued money and status and impressing his in-laws more than integrity and loyalty and family. And I didn't know how to relate to that person, didn't know how to have a relationship with him. On the fourth day, I woke up, and instead of feeling sad, I felt angry, really, truly, furiously angry. And that anger gave me clarity, gave me purpose, because I realized I didn't have to just accept this. I didn't have to let Marcus and Vanessa and her family get away with this. I couldn't get my money back through legal channels, but there were other ways to make sure they faced consequences, other ways to make sure they understood what they'd done. other ways to expose the truth, and make sure everyone knew what kind of people they really were. And I started to formulate a plan, a careful, strategic plan that would teach all of them a lesson they'd never forget. First, I needed information. I needed to understand exactly where my money had gone and what Vanessa's parents had done with it. I needed proof of their financial situation, proof that they were living beyond their means, proof that the story they'd told Marcus about needing help was either exaggerated or an outright lie. So I started digging. I'm good with computers, better than most people my age, and I knew how to find information online. I started with public records, pulled up property records for Vanessa's parents' house, and discovered they'd refinanced it 3 times in the past 10 years, each time pulling out equity. And now they owed more on it than it was worth. I pulled business records for Donald's company and found he'd filed for bankruptcy protection not once, but 3 times in the past 7 years. This wasn't a man facing a temporary setback. This was a man with a pattern of financial mismanagement. I looked at their social media and saw post after post showing off their lifestyle, the expensive vacations, the fancy dinners, the luxury purchases, all while they were supposedly on the brink of financial ruin. I screenshot everything, dated everything, organized it all into a detailed timeline, and what emerged was a clear picture of a family living far beyond their means, financing a lifestyle through debt, and when that debt caught up with them, they'd used my son as a bailout. They'd manipulated him, they'd taken advantage of his desire to impress them, his need to be accepted by them, and they'd stolen my life savings with no intention of ever paying it back. But I needed more than public records and social media posts. I needed inside information. I needed to know exactly what Donald and Patricia had done with my $87,000. I needed proof of how they'd spent it. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Janet Richardson. She was in her 50s, ex-police detective who'd started her own investigation firm, and she specialized in financial fraud. I met with her at her office, and I laid out everything: the timeline, the bank transfers, the lies Vanessa and Marcus had told, the public records showing Donald's financial problems, everything. And Janet listened carefully, taking notes. And when I finished, she said, "Mrs. Williams, I see cases like this more often than you'd think. Young people getting manipulated by partners and their families, getting bled dry financially. It's a form of abuse, really. And there are ways to fight back. But I need you to understand that this investigation might reveal things you don't want to know about your son and his marriage. Are you prepared for that?" And I said, "I'm prepared for anything. I need to know the truth. I need to understand exactly what happened to my money." And Janet nodded and said, "All right, let's get started." Janet worked fast. Within a week, she'd already uncovered information that made my blood boil. She'd obtained Donald's bank records through contacts she had in the financial industry. And what she found was damning. The $87,000 Marcus had given them hadn't gone to save the business or prevent foreclosure. It had gone to pay off credit card debt to the tune of $35,000, to make lease payments on their Mercedes and Patricia's Range Rover, another $15,000 to pay country club dues. They were 6 months behind on another $12,000, and the rest had gone to maintaining their lifestyle, paying for dinners and trips and shopping sprees. My life savings hadn't been invested in saving a business or preventing a family from becoming homeless. It had been used to maintain the illusion of wealth by people who were drowning in debt and couldn't admit they needed to downsize. Janet also discovered something else that made me even angrier. Vanessa had her own financial secrets. She had 3 credit cards maxed out to a total of $43,000 that Marcus apparently knew nothing about. She'd been shopping online constantly, buying designer clothes and handbags and shoes, all while crying poor to Marcus, all while telling him her family needed help, all while manipulating him into draining my savings account. And Marcus had no idea his wife was tens of thousands of dollars in debt herself. The investigation revealed that Vanessa had been hiding these purchases from Marcus, having packages delivered to her parents' house, opening credit card accounts in her maiden name, doing everything she could to keep her spending secret. Janet compiled everything into a detailed report with bank statements, credit card records, receipts, transaction histories, everything documented and verified. And when she presented it to me in her office, I sat there reading through it, feeling this cold fury settle over me. Because this wasn't just financial mismanagement. This was systematic deception. This was a family of con artists who'd identified my son as an easy target, someone with access to money, someone desperate to impress them, someone who could be manipulated into betraying his own mother. And they'd executed their plan perfectly. They'd gotten exactly what they wanted and faced no consequences. I asked Janet what my legal options were, whether I could sue, whether I could press charges, whether there was any way to get my money back through the courts. And she said, "Unfortunately, Mrs. Williams, the law isn't on your side here. Your son had legal access to that account. He had every right to withdraw that money. And Vanessa's parents have no legal obligation to repay money that was given as a gift, not a loan, unless you can prove fraud, which would be very difficult given that your son voluntarily gave them the money. There's not much you can do through legal channels. Your best option is to expose what happened, to make sure everyone knows the truth about what these people did. Sometimes public accountability is more powerful than legal consequences. And that's when my plan really came together. I couldn't get my money back through the courts, but I could make sure everyone knew what had happened. I could destroy the carefully constructed image that Vanessa's family had built. I could expose them as the frauds they were. And in doing so, I could show Marcus exactly who he'd chosen to trust over his own mother. I could make sure that everywhere they went, people would know the truth, would whisper about them, would judge them the way they judged me. And maybe, just maybe, Marcus would finally understand what he'd done. I started by creating a detailed document laying out everything. The complete transaction history from my savings account showing every withdrawal Marcus had made, including the dates and times, all in the middle of the night. The financial records Janet had obtained showing Donald and Patricia's true financial situation, their multiple bankruptcies, their mountains of debt, their pattern of living beyond their means. The credit card statements showing Vanessa's secret debt, her hidden shopping addiction, her deliberate deception. The bank records showing exactly how my $87,000 had been spent, not on saving a business, but on maintaining appearances, on country club dues and car leases and credit card payments. I organized everything chronologically with dates and amounts and account numbers. I included screenshots of social media posts showing Donald and Patricia and Vanessa flaunting their lifestyle while supposedly being on the brink of financial ruin. I included copies of property records showing the multiple refinances on their house, showing they owed more than it was worth. I made it comprehensive. I made it damning. I made it impossible to deny or dismiss. And then I started making copies. Lots and lots of copies. My first targets were Marcus's friends, the people he'd grown up with, the people who'd known him before Vanessa, the people who might still care enough about him to try to save him from this disaster. I found their addresses on social media, and I mailed each of them a copy of the document with a cover letter explaining what had happened, explaining that I wasn't trying to embarrass Marcus, but that I was trying to show him the truth about the people he'd chosen to trust. I asked them to reach out to him, to help him see what was happening, to help him understand that he was being used. Next, I targeted Vanessa's family. I sent copies to her siblings, to her aunts and uncles, to her cousins, everyone I could identify through social media and public records. I wanted them all to know what Donald and Patricia had done. I wanted them to know that the perfect, wealthy, successful image was a lie. I wanted them embarrassed and exposed. I sent a copy to the country club with a note explaining that the dues they were collecting were being paid with money stolen from a hard-working single mother who'd saved for 15 years. I sent copies to Donald's business partners, to his clients, to anyone I could identify who did business with him. I wanted them to know they were dealing with someone who'd filed for bankruptcy 3 times, who lived beyond his means, who'd manipulated his son-in-law into stealing from his own mother to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford. I sent a copy to Vanessa's employer, a law firm, where she worked as a paralegal, because I wanted them to know what kind of person they'd hired, someone who'd hidden tens of thousands in debt from her husband, someone who'd participated in manipulating him into stealing from his mother. But I didn't stop there. I also created a crowdfunding campaign on one of those fundraising websites, and I told my story in careful detail. I didn't use names, but I included enough specific information that anyone who knew us would recognize who I was talking about. I explained that I was a 54-year-old single mother who'd worked as a hospital administrator for 28 years, who'd raised her son alone after his father abandoned them, who'd saved $87,000 over 15 years for her son's future, only to have that son empty the account and give the money to his in-laws to maintain their wealthy lifestyle. I explained that I was now trying to rebuild my retirement savings from scratch, that I was facing the reality of working well into my 60s or 70s because the money I'd sacrificed so much to save was gone. I asked for help, not because I expected to recover $87,000, but because I wanted people to hear my story. I wanted accountability. I wanted the world to know what had happened. And the response was overwhelming. Within the first week, over 200 people had donated amounts ranging from $5 to $500. People shared the campaign on social media with comments like, "This is heartbreaking, and I can't believe a son would do this to his mother," and "Single mothers deserve help." Better. People sent me messages telling me their own stories of being betrayed by family members, of sacrificing everything for their children, only to have those children take advantage of them. People offered support and encouragement and solidarity, and within 3 weeks, I'd raised $14,000. It wasn't anywhere close to what I'd lost, but it was something. More importantly, every person who donated shared the campaign, and my story spread. It spread through my community, through the hospital where I worked, through Marcus's social circles, through Vanessa's family. Everyone was talking about it. Everyone knew what happened. Marcus called me after the first week, his voice shaking with rage. "Mom, what the hell did you do? Everyone knows. Everyone is talking about us. I've had friends calling me, asking if it's true. I've had people at work asking me about it. Vanessa's parents are getting calls from their country club, their business associates, everyone they know. People are treating us differently, looking at us differently. What were you thinking?" And I said calmly, "I was thinking that the truth should be known, Marcus. I was thinking that you stole from me and faced no consequences. I was thinking that Vanessa's family are con artists who manipulated you into betraying your own mother, and I wanted people to know what kind of people they really are." Marcus sputtered, "But Mom, you had no right to share private financial information. You've humiliated us. You've damaged Vanessa's parents' reputation. You've made it impossible for us to show our faces in public." And I said, "Good, Marcus. Maybe you should be embarrassed. Maybe you should feel ashamed of what you did. Maybe facing public accountability will teach you something that I clearly failed to teach you. That actions have consequences. That you can't just take advantage of people and expect there to be no repercussions." And Marcus said, "This is cruel, Mom. This is vindictive. This isn't like you." And I said, "You're right, Marcus. The old me would have suffered in silence, would have accepted this betrayal and moved on, because I didn't want to make waves, didn't want to embarrass you, didn't want to be difficult. But you know what? I'm done being that person. I'm done letting people take advantage of me. I'm done prioritizing other people's comfort over my own well-being. You took everything from me, Marcus, and now everyone gets to know exactly what you did." I heard Vanessa's voice in the background, shouting something, and then she grabbed the phone from Marcus, and she was crying, which was clearly supposed to make me feel guilty, but it didn't. "Diane, how could you do this to us?" she sobbed. "We're family. We're supposed to support each other, and you've destroyed us. You've destroyed my parents' business. You've ruined their reputation. People are calling them con artists and thieves. My mother can barely leave the house. She's so embarrassed." And I said, "Vanessa, your parents are con artists. They manipulated my son into stealing my life savings so they could maintain a lifestyle they can't afford. They lied about needing help when really they just wanted to avoid the consequences of their own poor decisions. And you helped them. You participated in this scheme. You hid your own debt from Marcus, you manipulated him, you used him, and now you're all facing the consequences of those choices." Vanessa screamed into the phone, "You're a bitter old woman who can't stand to see your son happy. You're jealous that he chose me over you, and you're trying to destroy his marriage." And I laughed, actually laughed out loud, because the accusation was so absurd. And I said, "Vanessa, I'm not trying to destroy your marriage. You and your family did that all on your own when you built your relationship on lies and manipulation and theft. I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth. And honey, if the truth destroys your marriage, then maybe that marriage wasn't built on a very solid foundation to begin with." And she hung up on me, which was fine because I'd said everything I needed to say. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was spectacular and satisfying in ways I hadn't expected. Vanessa's parents did get kicked out of their country club when their payment for dues bounced for the 7th time, and the club investigated and discovered they owed over $15,000 in back payments. The club didn't just revoke their membership, they also sent a letter to all the other members explaining why, which meant everyone in their social circle knew they were broke, pretending to be rich. Donald's business suffered as well. Several of his business partners pulled out of deals when they saw the documentation I'd sent, showing his pattern of bankruptcies, his mismanagement, his willingness to manipulate family members for money. One partner even filed a lawsuit alleging fraud, claiming Donald had misrepresented the financial health of their joint ventures. Vanessa's siblings called their parents furious, embarrassed that the family's dirty laundry had been aired publicly. Her brother apparently told Donald that he was ashamed to share a last name with him. Her sister told Patricia that she'd always suspected they were living beyond their means, but had been too polite to say anything. And now everyone knew the truth, and they had to deal with the embarrassment at their own jobs, in their own social circles, with their own friends. The perfect wealthy family image that Donald and Patricia had worked so hard to maintain was shattered, completely destroyed, and there was no putting it back together. But the biggest impact was on Marcus and Vanessa's marriage. Janet, the private investigator, kept me updated because I'd kept her on retainer to monitor the situation, and she reported that Marcus had confronted Vanessa about her secret credit card debt after one of her credit card companies sent a collections notice to their apartment. Vanessa had tried to hide it, but Marcus had opened the mail and discovered she owed $43,000 that he knew nothing about. And according to Janet's sources, they'd had a massive screaming fight that ended with Vanessa throwing things and Marcus storming out. Marcus apparently stayed with a friend for a few days, and during that time he'd done some digging of his own. He'd gone through Vanessa's things and found credit card statements showing purchase after purchase. Designer handbags that cost thousands of dollars, shoes that cost hundreds, jewelry that cost even more, all purchased in secret, all hidden from him, all while she was telling him they needed to take my money to help her parents. And something about discovering her deception seemed to wake Marcus up, seemed to make him realize that he'd been manipulated, that the woman he'd married wasn't who he thought she was, that he'd betrayed his own mother for people who didn't deserve his loyalty. Vanessa apparently begged him to come back, promised she'd get help for her shopping addiction, promised she'd be honest from now on. But Marcus didn't go back. Instead, according to Janet, he'd moved back in with his college roommate and had started talking to a divorce attorney. He'd apparently told friends that he felt like an idiot, that he couldn't believe he'd let Vanessa and her family manipulate him into stealing from his own mother, that he'd thrown away the most important relationship in his life for people who only cared about money. About 2 months after I'd sent out all those documents and started the crowdfunding campaign, Marcus showed up at my house. Unannounced, it was a Saturday morning, and I was in my garden planting tomatoes when I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked up and saw Marcus getting out, and my first instinct was to go inside, to refuse to talk to him, because I was still so angry, still so hurt. But something about the way he looked stopped me. He'd lost weight, probably 20 pounds. He had dark circles under his eyes. His clothes looked wrinkled, like he'd been sleeping in them. And when he saw me, he just stood there in my driveway and started crying. Real crying. The kind where you can't catch your breath. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and painful. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my hands, and waited. I didn't go to him, didn't comfort him, didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't okay, and I wasn't going to pretend it was. And finally, after a few minutes, he walked over to me and said, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. For everything. I don't even know how to begin to apologize or to explain what I was thinking, because looking back now, I don't know what I was thinking. I got caught up in Vanessa and her family and their lifestyle, and I wanted to be part of it, wanted to prove I was good enough. And I stopped thinking about you, about everything you'd done for me, about all the sacrifices you'd made. And I took your money and I gave it to people who didn't deserve it, people who used me. And now I've lost everything. I've lost my marriage, I've lost my friends' respect, I've lost your trust. And I deserve it. I deserve all of it." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, who'd betrayed me so deeply, and I said, "Do you really understand what you took from me, Marcus? Because it wasn't just money. It was 15 years of my life. It was every overtime shift I worked, every meal I skipped, every vacation I didn't take, every nice thing I denied myself so I could save for your future. And you threw it away. You gave it to people who spent it on country club dues and car leases and maintaining an image, while I'm left trying to figure out how to retire someday, how to have any kind of financial security in my old age. Do you understand the magnitude of what you did?" And Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I understand, Mom. I understand now. I didn't then. I was so blinded by wanting to impress Vanessa's family, by wanting to be the hero who saved them, that I didn't think about what I was really doing. But I've had a lot of time to think over the past few weeks, a lot of time to really look at my choices. And Vanessa and her family, and to see them for who they really are. And I can't believe I chose them over you. I can't believe I was so stupid. I said, Marcus, I need you to understand something. What you did broke something fundamental in our relationship. You broke my trust. And trust, once broken, is almost impossible to fully repair. I forgive you because carrying this anger is destroying me. But forgiving you doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. It doesn't mean I trust you again. It means I'm choosing to let go of the rage for my own peace. But you're going to have to earn back my trust if you want any kind of relationship with me going forward. And that's going to take time and consistent effort and proof through your actions, not just your words, that you've learned and grown and changed. Marcus said, I know, Mom, and I'll do whatever it takes. I've already started working with a financial advisor, and I've set up a payment plan. I'm going to pay you back every penny, even if it takes me the rest of my life. I've opened a trust fund in your name, and I'm putting $500 into it every month. I've already put in 3 months without telling you, because I wanted to show you through actions that I'm serious about making this right. And I looked at him and saw genuine remorse, saw real understanding, saw my son finally taking responsibility. And I said, all right, Marcus, that's a start, but I need more than just money. I need you to understand why what you did was wrong. I need you to understand how manipulation works, how Vanessa and her family identified you as a target and exploited you. I need you to understand so it never happens again. Marcus nodded and said, I've actually started seeing a therapist to work through all of this, to understand why I was so easily manipulated, why I was so desperate for Vanessa's family's approval, why I was willing to betray you for people I barely knew. And I'm learning a lot about myself, about patterns I developed growing up without a father, about always feeling like I had to prove my worth, about being vulnerable to people who made me feel important and special. And the therapist is helping me see how Vanessa and her family used those vulnerabilities against me. And hearing him say this, hearing him taking real steps to understand and change, softened something in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but hope. Hope that maybe my son could become the man I'd raised him to be. Hope that maybe we could eventually rebuild some kind of relationship. We sat in my garden for over an hour, talking, really talking, for the first time in years. Marcus told me about his marriage to Vanessa, about how controlling she'd been, about how she'd isolated him from his friends, about how she'd constantly made him feel like he wasn't good enough unless he was spending money on her, buying her things, taking her places, about how exhausting it had been trying to keep up with her expectations. He told me about discovering her secret debt, about the fight they'd had, about how betrayed he'd felt when he realized she'd been lying to him for their entire marriage. And I said, now you know how I felt, Marcus, when I discovered you'd been lying to me, stealing from me for months. And he nodded and said, I know, Mom, and I'm so sorry. Marcus told me he was filing for divorce, that he'd already moved out, that he and Vanessa hadn't spoken in weeks, except through their attorneys. He said Vanessa was living with her parents, who'd had to move out of their house, finally, into a 2-bedroom apartment in a less expensive part of town because they couldn't keep up with the mortgage and property taxes. He said Donald's business had essentially collapsed, that most of his partners had pulled out, that he was facing multiple lawsuits, that he'd had to file for bankruptcy again, his 4th time. I asked Marcus what happened to my money, whether there was any chance of getting any of it back. And he said, honestly, Mom, no. Vanessa's parents spent it all. They have nothing left. They're working retail jobs now, trying to dig out from under their debt. And even if I sued them, which my attorney says I probably couldn't win, since the money was technically mine to give, there's nothing to recover. They're broke, and they're going to stay broke for a long time. But Mom, I promise you, I will pay you back myself. It's going to take years, probably over a decade, but I'm committed to it. I've already put $1,500 into the trust, and I'm going to keep putting $500 in every single month until I've paid back the full $87,000. I looked at the paperwork he'd brought, showing the trust account he'd set up, showing the deposits he'd already made, showing that he'd structured it so I had full control and he had no access. And I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, but acknowledgement that my son was trying, really trying, to make things right. And I said, Marcus, this means a lot. This shows me you're serious. But I need you to understand that our relationship is going to be different going forward. I can't just welcome you back with open arms and pretend nothing happened. I need time. I need to see consistent effort over months and years. I need to know that you've really changed, that you've really learned, that this will never happen again. Marcus said, I understand, Mom, and I'll wait as long as it takes. I'll prove to you that I'm not that person anymore, that I'm not the man who stole from his mother. I'll show you through my actions every single day that I've learned and grown. And I stood up and said, All right, Marcus, you can start by helping me finish planting these tomatoes. And we worked side by side in my garden for the next hour, not saying much, just being together. And it felt like a tiny step forward, like maybe, eventually, we could find our way back to something resembling a mother-son relationship. Over the following months, Marcus kept his promises. He deposited $500 into the trust account every single month without fail. He came to visit every Sunday for dinner, and we'd talk about his therapy, about what he was learning about himself, about the divorce proceedings, about his job and his life. He was humble and honest and accountable. He never made excuses, never tried to minimize what he'd done, never asked me to just get over it. He gave me space when I needed it and showed up consistently when I needed support. And slowly, very slowly, I started to trust him again, started to believe that he'd really changed, that he'd really learned from his mistakes. About 6 months after our conversation in the garden, Marcus introduced me to someone new. He was dating a woman named Nina, who he'd met through a friend. Nina was a teacher. She came from a working-class background like ours. She was kind and genuine and unpretentious. And when Marcus told her the whole story about what he'd done to me, she'd apparently said that rebuilding his relationship with his mother was non-negotiable if he wanted a future with her. And I loved her immediately. Not just because she was nice, but because she understood what mattered. She valued family and integrity and honesty, and she wasn't impressed by money or status or appearances. She was impressed by character. Nina and I had coffee together one day, just the two of us, and she said, Miss Diane, I want you to know that I would never come between you and Marcus. I know what family means. I know the sacrifices you made raising him alone, and I'll make sure he never forgets that. I'll make sure he honors you and respects you and values you the way you deserve. And I knew she meant it. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice. And I felt this wave of relief because my son had finally found someone worth his time, someone who would build him up instead of tear him down, someone who valued the same things I'd tried to teach him his whole life. Marcus and Nina got married about a year and a half after he and Vanessa's divorce was finalized. It was a small, simple ceremony at my church, nothing fancy or expensive, just family and close friends. And this time, I wasn't just a guest. I was involved in every aspect of planning. I helped Nina pick out her dress. I made the cake myself. I gave a speech at the reception about second chances and growth and becoming the person you're meant to be. And when I danced with Marcus at the reception, he whispered, Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for holding me accountable. Thank you for loving me enough to let me face the consequences of my actions and learn from them. And I said, that's what real love is, Marcus. It's not always comfortable or easy, but it's honest and it demands better. Now, 3 years after that Tuesday morning when I discovered my empty bank account, I'm 57 years old, and I have about $42,000 in my personal savings account, plus the trust fund Marcus has been building, which now has over $19,000 in it. I'll have to work until I'm at least 65 to build up enough for a comfortable retirement. But I'm okay with that. I'm healthy, I'm good at my job, and I've learned something valuable through all of this. I've learned that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most important lessons. I learned to set boundaries, to demand respect, to choose myself, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. I learned that forgiveness doesn't mean accepting bad behavior. It means releasing anger while still maintaining boundaries. It means giving people a chance to prove they've changed, while protecting yourself from being hurt again. I learned that my son is human, that he can make terrible mistakes, but also learn and grow and become better. I learned that trust can be rebuilt, but it takes time and consistency and proof through actions, not just words. Marcus and Nina bought a small house last year. Nothing fancy, just a modest 3-bedroom in a decent neighborhood, with a mortgage they can actually afford. And they're building equity, the slow, steady way I built everything in my life, through hard work and patience and discipline. They're talking about having kids soon, and Marcus has already told me that when they do, he wants to raise them the way I raised him, teaching them about sacrifice and hard work and the value of earning what you have, teaching them that character matters more than appearances, that integrity matters more than status, that family is about loyalty and honesty and showing up even when it's hard. My relationship with Marcus is good now. Not the same as it was before the betrayal, but good in a different way. More honest, more realistic, more based on mutual respect than blind trust. We have dinner together every week. We talk about real things, about struggles and growth and lessons learned. We don't pretend the past didn't happen. We acknowledge it. We learn from it. We use it to build something stronger. As for Vanessa, I heard through mutual acquaintances that she remarried about a year ago to a guy she met online who claimed to be a successful entrepreneur but turned out to be running a pyramid scheme. She's apparently still chasing that wealthy lifestyle, still trying to project an image of success while drowning in debt. And I feel sorry for her, not because she's struggling, but because she hasn't learned. She's still making the same mistakes, still valuing all the wrong things, still thinking the answer is finding someone with money instead of building something real through work and sacrifice. And she'll probably keep repeating these patterns until something forces her to change. Vanessa's parents are still working retail jobs, still living in that small apartment, still dealing with the aftermath of their financial collapse. Their perfect, wealthy image is gone, completely destroyed, and everyone in their former social circle knows the truth. Patricia apparently tried to reach out to Marcus once, about a year after the divorce, asking if he could lend them money again, and Marcus called me to ask what he should do. And I said, Marcus, that's your decision. You're an adult. But think about this. People who don't learn from their mistakes will keep making them. If you give them money now, they'll be back in 6 months asking for more because they haven't changed. Their lifestyle hasn't changed. They still think they deserve things they haven't earned. And Marcus said, You're right, Mom. I'm not doing it. I'm done being an ATM for people who don't respect me. And I was so proud of him in that moment because it meant he'd finally learned the lesson. The crowdfunding campaign I started ended up raising $16,500 total from over 400 people who were moved by my story, who wanted to help, who believed in accountability and justice. I used that money to start rebuilding my retirement savings. And every time I look at that account balance, I think about all those strangers who cared enough to help a woman they'd never met, who believed my story mattered, who wanted to support me. And it reminds me that there's goodness in the world, that not everyone is out to take advantage, that sometimes people show up for each other in unexpected ways. The documents I sent out, the detailed accounting of everything that happened, had exactly the effect I'd hoped for. It exposed the truth. It created accountability. It showed everyone who Donald and Patricia and Vanessa really were. And it taught Marcus a lesson he clearly needed to learn, that actions have consequences, that you can't betray people and expect there to be no repercussions, that the truth eventually comes out, no matter how hard you try to hide it. Some people called me vindictive, said I went too far, said I should have handled it privately. But I don't regret it, not for a second, because private handling wasn't working. Marcus wasn't listening. He was defending his choices. And I needed him to see the truth, needed everyone to see the truth. And public accountability was the only way to make that happen. Looking back now, 3 years later, I can see how much I've grown through this experience. I used to be someone who avoided conflict, who prioritized other people's comfort over my own needs, who sacrificed endlessly without expecting anything in return. And that made me vulnerable, made me an easy target for people who wanted to take advantage. And I let it happen. I let Marcus take advantage. I let Vanessa and her family take advantage because I didn't want to be difficult, didn't want to make waves, didn't want to be the bad guy. But going through this experience, fighting back, exposing the truth, demanding accountability, changed me. It made me stronger, made me more willing to stand up for myself, made me understand that being kind doesn't mean being a doormat, that loving someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you, that family doesn't give anyone the right to betray you. I'm proud of the woman I've become, proud that I fought back, proud that I demanded respect, proud that I didn't just accept this betrayal and move on in silence. I showed Marcus and Vanessa and her family that you can't take advantage of hardworking people without consequences. And I showed myself that I'm strong. Enough to stand up for myself, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means losing my son temporarily, even when people call me cruel or vindictive, because my worth isn't determined by how accommodating I am or how much I'm willing to sacrifice. It's determined by how I treat myself, how I honor my own needs, how I demand to be treated with respect. To anyone watching this who's been betrayed by family, who's been taken advantage of, who's sacrificed everything only to have it thrown back in their face, I want you to know that you can survive this. You can fight back. You can demand accountability. And you can rebuild. You don't have to accept betrayal quietly. You don't have to prioritize your betrayer's comfort over your own healing. You have the right to expose the truth, to set boundaries, to choose yourself. And yes, people will call you bitter or vindictive or cruel, but those people aren't the ones who were betrayed. Those people don't understand the depth of the pain you're feeling, and their opinions don't matter. What matters is that you protect yourself, that you demand better, that you refuse to let people take advantage of you ever again. My name is Diane. I'm 57 years old, and my son stole $87,000 from me and gave it to his in-laws. And I survived it. More than survived it. I fought back. I exposed the truth. I demanded accountability. I rebuilt my life and my relationship with my son on my terms. And if I can do it, anyone can. Because the strength you need isn't something you have to find outside yourself. It's already inside you. It's always been inside you. You just have to be willing to access it, to use it, to let it guide you toward demanding the respect you deserve. And once you do, once you stand up for yourself and refuse to be a victim, everything changes. You change, and the people around you change, and your life becomes yours again. Really, truly yours. And that's worth fighting for. That's worth everything.